Hello, this is Alan Elliott with SAS Essentials Mastering SAS for Data Analytics, 3rd edition. This chapter is Reading, Writing, and Importing Data, Chapter 3, Part 1. In this chapter, we're going to be learning how to use SAS libraries and permanent datasets. You'll be able to read and write permanent SAS datasets, how to interactively import data from another program, to define SAS libraries using program code, to import data using source code, and to discover the contents of a SAS dataset, and to understand how the data step reads and stores data. So let's get started. As usual, make sure you have all of the files needed to run the examples, and you can go to this website to find those files. So let's get started here with section 3.1, working with SAS libraries. Now, we're going to talk in this section about permanent data sets. So far, all the data sets we've created so far is what we would call working data sets. A working data set vanishes when you end a SAS session. It would be like in Excel where you entered information in Excel and exited it without saving. That's what a work data set is like. However, we can create permanent data sets that are stored on our hard drive and you can get again and again. But first we need to identify a location, that is a library or folder on our hard drive. Then we store the data sets in that library or folder. Now in SAS terminology, we store it in a library. In Windows terminology, we often refer to that location on a hard drive as a folder. You may be more used to that terminology. So what is a dataset file versus a SAS code file? We're talking about dataset files in this section here. The SAS dataset is a separate file like a Word doc file or an Excel file, XLS. It contains more than just the text or the numbers like in an Excel file. It also contains things like formats and calculations. So a SAS, it's not the SAS code. SAS code is that ASCII file we've looked at earlier that you could read in any editor like Notepad. But a SAS dataset, which has an extension .sas7bdat, is a particular kind of a file that we can't read with a regular editor because it contains not only the data, but all sorts of other things related to that data. So let's talk a little bit more about SAS datasets. What are they? Where do they come from? Often we create a SAS dataset using a data statement within SAS. This data set is an internal representation of the data created by this data statement. It contains more than the data values, as I mentioned, such as variable names, labels, codings, and calculations, and so forth. This dataset name is referred to by a name that indicates whether the dataset is temporary or permanent. So let's look at that. A temporary dataset is named with a single level name like measles and March 2020. We've seen datasets like that. Although technically the name is work.measles and work.march 2020, but they're working datasets. If you ever see this work prefix, it simply means it is a working dataset and it will be gone when you end SAS. On the other hand, a permanent dataset is a file saved on the hard drive. And we're going to see that there are at least two ways we can refer to this permanent data set. One is by using the Windows file name, such as, quote, C:\SAS data some data. Now that means that we're creating a data set or referring to a data set named some data that is stored in the SAS data folder on our C drive. Same with C:\research COVID-22. That file name, the dataset file name, is COVID-22, but it's stored on our hard drive in a folder called research on the hard drive C:. I hope you know enough about Windows file names that makes sense to you. Or, so that's one way we can refer to the SAS dataset. Another way we can refer to the SAS dataset is by using a prefix to the dataset name. For instance, mysasdata.people. In that case, people is the name of the dataset, and it's stored in a library called mysasdata. We'll define library in just a second. Or research.covid2022. Again, the COVID-22 2022 is the name of the SAS dataset, and it's stored in a library, a SAS library named research. So what is a SAS library? A SAS library, we give it a name, and we call it the SAS library name. For instance, the mysasdata library name. We're going to refer to, what it does is it refers to a specific location on the hard drive. So mysasdata, in our case, refers to a location on our hard drive called C:\SAS data. Those are two ways of basically saying the same thing. One in Windows terminology and one in SAS terminology. The same with the research library name. This graph shows you how SAS reads in data. First we start with raw data on the disk, as you see in the little cloud. Then you read the data into SAS, typically using a data statement. And then from that point, we can choose one of two ways to save that data. We can save it or store it in a temporary SAS data set, such as work.something, some data, or we can store it in a permanent data set, such as mysasdata.somedata, or using the Windows file name, C:\SAS somedata. So, in summary, a library name like mysasdata points to a folder location such as C:\SAS data. Similarly, research may point to a folder location on the hard drive. Oftentimes you have a library name and a data set, such as mysasdata and report. Then we would complete the name by saying mysasdata.report. Or in using Windows terminology, we would say C:\SAS data/report, which is the physical file name on the hard drive. Okay, here's a quick quiz. So you have two SAS libraries defined. One is lib1, we've named it lib1, and another we've named lib2. Now lib1 refers to the Windows name C:\research tab 1, and lib2 refers to n:\network. So where is a SAS data? If we have a SAS data file called lib1.mydata, where is that file stored on the hard drive? So take a second. So where would lib1 be? Well, it would be in the lib1 data library in this location. How would we refer to the data set called this? So it's going to be in the network folder on the N drive, and its name is June 2023. What would that be called how would we refer to that data set? Well, here's answers. First of all, question 1, the data is stored at C:\research tab 1, and it's called mydata.sas7bdat. And then the file in network June 2023 we would refer to as lib2.june2023. All right, so let's go on to 3.2, creating permanent data sets using the Windows file name technique. So let's open up a file called write.sas. So go into SAS, make sure you're in a editor and do a file, open program, and open write.sas. This is from example 3.1 if you want to follow along in the text, which I would encourage you to do. Now, what we're doing is we're making a change here. We're going to put in the data statement the quote C:\SAS data people. So what this does is it's going to create a data set named people stored in this location. So if we run that and then look in the log file which you can do by clicking on the tab at the bottom of the page, you'll see this indication. There were 5 observations read from the data set. And notice here it created its own library name, WC000001. So that is a default library name that it created. Now, something you need to know about this library that it created, and that is it's a temporary data. It's a temporary library. So just like a temporary data set, this library name is sort of like a work data set or library. It's going to go away if we stop SAS and come back in. So, but it's out there as long as we're working in SAS in this at this time. So if we need to get back to that file, we can always refer to it by that name. However, as I mentioned, in this session, although we can use that file, it will go away once we in SAS. But the difference is that the actual data set stays on the hard drive. So the link, the library name goes away, WC0001, that goes away, but the file itself, the data itself is still on our hard drive in C:\SAS data. So if you recall, when we created that data set, we gave it a specific location, and that caused it to be saved on the hard drive. So although the data is on the hard drive, the library name that was created goes away. So that's a tricky thing. You just need to get used to probably using a true library name. Okay, so let's use that data that we've created in the permanent location. And there's 2 ways we could do that. We could refer to it as WC0001.SOMEDATA, or we can always refer to it, even if we've exited and come back in, it's going to be on our hard drive. So we can refer to it using C:\SAS data SOMEDATA. So you see here in proc means, I have a statement data equal, and then it gives it a file name. This file name is the Windows file name, so it knows where it's at, the location, the folder, and the name of the data set. So that's one way to use a data set that we have created. Now note that there's no input or infile statement, and this is something that you just need to get used to. Once a data set is out there on your hard drive, a SAS data set, you no longer have to recreate it using input or infile. You just need to access it in a procedure. So proc means whatever the data set name is. It makes it very simple. If we run this program, we'll see that it actually did run, and we have 50 variables in the, or not 50 variables, 50 records in the data set, and it gives us the means and other statistics. All right, let's move on to 3.3, creating permanent SAS data sets using a SAS library. Another technique for reading and writing SAS data sets is using the SAS library technique. So before using a SAS library, we have to create one. Now we saw that SAS created its own earlier, but that was really not that useful. We want to create our own. There are 2 ways we're going to look at it. The SAS library technique involves creating a nickname that refers to the drive location in Windows. In SAS terminology, this is called a library name. For example, we could create or define a library name such as my work that refers to this location in our hard drive. Or we could create my work library name that refers to a complicated network folder such as the one down below. And that's where it becomes very handy, because it's much easier to remember my work than it would be this long Windows folder name. Once we have a library nickname, then we can use it to refer to a SAS data set that's online. So for instance, once we've defined my work as a library name, now we can refer to a file called Jan2022 as mywork.jan2022. My work refers to the location on the hard drive. Jan2022 refers to the SAS data set. So Jan2022.SAS7, that is the actual name on the hard drive, and it's in that directory that's shown below in Windows terminology. All right, so we've seen a little bit about this work versus permanent data sets and how they're named. So within a SAS program, every data set actually does have two parts in its name. For example, the SAS data set may refer to mySASLive.May 2023, and that is the first name is the library name, mySASLive. The second name is the dataset name. Even the temporary files have a two-part name. In this case, for instance, work.lotsofdata. The library refers to work, which is a temporary library, and the dataset name then is lots of data. So they all both have, so this is tricky, you just got to get used to it. They both have like a two-word name, but the work one is temporary, whereas the one you've created, the library, is a permanent location on your hard drive. All right, 3.4, creating a SAS library using a dialog box. Now, I like this version of creating a SAS library because you can create a permanent SAS library, as we're going to see. So an easy way to create this SAS library in Windows version of SAS is to use what's called the New Library dialog box. To display the SAS library dialog box, make the SAS Explorer window, that's the one on the left window. Click on the Explorer tab at the bottom of the left window in the main SAS screen, and you should see a window that looks something like this. It may not look exactly like this, but it should have a library icon in it, as you see here, libraries. All right, double-click on the libraries icon, and a second dialog or a second window will appear called New. And in this window, if you do a click somewhere in the white space, do a right-click, and then choose the option that comes up, New. That's going to open up this dialog box. Now this dialog box is very important and very useful. In this, we're going to identify three pieces of information. First, the name of the library, which we're going to call mySASLive, as you can see there. We're going to click the option that says Enable at Startup. This allows you to create this library once, and SAS will remember it. And then, where is the SAS library going to be located? It's going to be in C:/SAS data. You could browse to that, but if you know it, you can just type it in. Once you're certain that you have these three pieces of information correct, then click on the OK button. So let's look at a hands-on example, 3.2, and again, follow along in the book. So in this example, we're going to create a SAS library and give it a name. Now, this example goes through exactly what I just talked about, so I'm not going to go through it again, but use this example to create this SAS library called mySASLive because we're going to use it throughout the book for future examples. So make sure that you create this library name. Now, if you've put your data in someplace else other than C:/SAS data, then enter that as the path. And then once you enter it as the path, then anytime we use mySASLive, it's going to point to the library location that you have used on your computer. So once you have created this permanent library named mySASLive, it's going to begin appearing on the left-hand side under your Active Libraries window. Now, you'll notice there are 6 libraries that are by default in SAS when you first load it. Yours may be slightly different. But we have created the one that's circled there called mySASLive. And that library is now going to contain all of the data and examples, in fact, that we have available that we're going to be using in this book. So let's just take a quick look at that. If we double-click on the mySASLive icon, then this window comes up. And this window is the content, as you can see there under Explorer, is the contents of mySASLive. Now, how did those data files get there? If you loaded the data files, as indicated at the first of this tutorial, or in the first tutorial, from alanelliott.com/SAS, then you've loaded all of these files already onto your hard drive. Now, if you've done this and nothing shows up, then you've done something wrong and you haven't installed the data files as they should be. So stop here, go back and make sure you bring in the file names as described. You can look in the book or in the first tutorial and find out how to bring these in and save them on your hard drive. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, we're going to find a data set named SumData. And just to show you that this could be done on any of these data sets, but we're going to double click on the SumData data set, and it's going to show us the contents of that data set. And we can see here now it's a data set that has a number, maybe 50 or so records in it, with ID number, intervention group, age, baseline, so forth and so on. So you can go out there and look at any of those data sets and see what the contents of those data sets are. And that helps you when you're doing an analysis or whatever. You might need to know what is in that data set so I can know how to do my analysis. Now when we're finished looking at that data set, we can close it by clicking on the little X at the top right of the window. Now we're going to return to the SAS editor window, and we're going to use that data set. So we know it's there. We know it has a library name called MySASLive. So just like we did the proc means earlier, where we used the Windows reference to a data set, now we're going to do a proc means and use the library way to use a data set. So proc means data equal. Now notice it's not in quotes. When it's the Windows name of a file on your hard drive, you put it in quotes. But if it's a SAS library name, you don't need the quotes. So we say mysaslive.sumdata and then semicolon run, semicolon. So we enter that code, we run it, and we notice now that again it gives us the answers here. We have 50 records, ID number, and so forth and so on. All right. Now another example, this time we're going to create a data set in the MySASLive library. So let's open the program called write.sas, and you already should know how to do this. File, open program. And in the data line, in the data statement, we're going to put in there mysaslive.people2. Now what is this going to do? Notice here, we're creating a data set, and that data set name is mysaslive.people2. So what we're doing is we're creating a data set in the library called MySASLive. MySASLive points to a location on our hard drive. So people2 data set is going to be stored on our hard drive in the location indicated by the nickname MySASLive. Now when we run that, we're going to again see the proc means is going to say, I see that you have that data set is out there, we've referenced it, and so it gives us these values. All right, so if we look at the Explorer and the contents of MySASLive, we'll notice that there is now a file called people2, the one we just created in the MySASLive library. If you wanted to, you could double click on this file to verify its contents, and then close the viewer like we did in the previous example. All right, let's look at section 3.5, creating a SAS library using code. Now this is another way to create a SAS library, but this one creates a temporary SAS library, and we can do it sort of on the fly in code when we need a directory, a library. So here we see that we use the code called using lib name, which is the keyword, and then new lib is the name of the library we want to create, and then the location, in this case C:\SAS data. It's okay that we already have another library pointing to that location. We're just creating a new library. That's fine. Now once we've created it, we can use it in a procedure, for instance proc means, and if I can use data equal new lib.sumdata, that will now point to the new library that we've just created in the C:\SAS data folder on Windows. All right, let's see if we get this. Let's have a little quick quiz. So here we have our code, and we want to know where on our hard drive is the data set SumData. So where is that going to be located? And then what is the name of the file name? All right, so we should know now that the location on the hard drive where SumData is stored is in the new lib library, and that library is at C:\SAS data. So that's where it's located. So the physical file called sumdata.sas7bdat is located in the C:\SAS data folder in Windows. And then what's the file name? Well, the file name, as I just mentioned, is sumdata.sas7bdat in SAS terminology, or if we want to use Windows terminology, it's C:\SAS data /sumdata.sas7bdat. All right, now let's do hands-on example 3.3. In SAS Explorer, we're going to display the window named Contents in the SAS environment. And to do that, you double-click on the Libraries icon, as we've done before. Active libraries appear. Then examine the active libraries. There should not be a library named MyLab2 unless you've done this before somehow. So in the editor window, I want you to open up an editor or open up the program file called livename.sas, and it contains the following code. And we should now recognize this. It's the code says livename, MyLab2, and then a location. So this is going to create a library called MyLab2. When we run this program, the livename statement creates the SAS library named MyLab2, but it doesn't create any output there. It just creates the link or the shortcut to the library. We should know actually that there's already a bunch of data in that location. So let's examine the library a little bit. And I'm going to encourage you, I'm not doing the entire example usually, and I encourage you, if you would, maybe just stop and do the complete example 3.3 to see what the results are. Now to practice creating libraries, I encourage you to do this exercise. Create the following SAS libraries using the wizard. So what we're doing here is we're using the wizard to create some libraries, and we're going to use the livename statement to create some libraries. So using the wizard, create MyLab1, MyLab2. You know, just if you create 5 libraries using this technique, then you'll know how to do it. And in the same way, if you use the livename command and make a few libraries, MyLab A, B, C, D, E, then you'll know how to do it. It's just a little exercise to solidify your knowledge about how to create those libraries. Once you've created them, go to the Explorer and see that they actually exist. Now, what you've done here is you created some permanent libraries, MyLab1, MyLab2, and some temporary ones called MyLab A, B, C, D, and E. All right, let's look at section 3.6, using data in permanent SAS datasets. So after you've created a SAS library, either permanent or temporary, you can access the data in that library within SAS procedures or as input into other data steps. And we've seen this as we went through some examples, but just to solidify what we're talking about. So I can use proc means data equals. So data equals says we want you to do the procedure called means, and what data do we want you to use? We want you to use the data located here, data equal. And we can do it or reference it in several different ways. We can reference it with the Windows folder information, :/SAS data some data, or we can reference it using the MySAS lib that we've created earlier, or we could use the library called MyLab2 that we created earlier. So there's several ways then that you can locate the data or tell SAS what data to use for a specific means. And we're going to see this over and over again as we move on through the book, a procedure and then a procedure name, data equal, in some location. Now let's open up the program called readfile.sas. This is example 3.4. It says proc means data equal, and notice here we have the data location in Windows is in quotes. So the point of this exercise is to help you realize that there are the two ways that you use to specify data are a little different. When you're referring to the data that's in Windows by specifying a folder name, it's in quotes. You can use single quotes or double quotes, it doesn't matter, as shown here. Or if we use the SAS library name, mysaslib.somedata, notice it is not in quotes. This is a very common error that I see a lot of times when as people are beginning to use this, is they would put a quote around the mysaslib. No. The quotes go around only if it's referring to a location in a Windows folder. If you're using a SAS folder, it's easier using the SAS folder. No quotes are required, just mysaslib.somedata. And again, this example 3.4, you might complete this exercise in the text or go through it again. All right, let's look at section 3.7, importing data from another program. Now this is really handy and important. So before you import data from another file format such as Excel, which is very common, at least in my work, Excel was probably the most common way that we would enter data. We need to make sure that it's ready to import. Now most files have to have the following criteria, and that is the first row should be a SAS friendly variable names. Now we defined variable names early on, and so you know what they should look like. And then each column within the Excel program should contain data that's consistent to the variable type. In other words, if you're going to have a column named name, which is going to be, you know, Bill, Fred, whatever, those are character variables. They should all be character type variables in that column. If you have a column called age, for instance, it should be all numbers. If you have a entry called with greater than 21 or something like that, that is not a number. And so you have to be consistent in order for it to read them in correctly. In fact, SAS goes out there and looks at the first several entries and says, this is a character, this is a number, this is a date. And so it's going to try to figure out what kind of data are in the columns. And so that's very important that it be consistent throughout. So we're going to look at importing a couple of different kinds of files. First, let's look at a CSV file. That's a comma separated values file. Again, something that you often may see or download from another directory or something like that, or you can create it in Excel. In this case, we're going to have the first row containing SAS variables separated by commas, and again, each adhering to the SAS naming conventions. Beginning on the second line, each line contains the data values for one subject. And again, remember in our early examples, we saw where we had one record per subject. That's what we want here. 2 commas in a row indicate a missing value. So if we don't know a number or something like that, we could put 2 commas in a row or a dot. Or sometimes we can use a missing code value, such as -99. And we're going to talk about missing values in a later chapter. Text missing values can be represented by double quotes. So here's an example of a comma separated value file ready for import. Here on the first line we have the names of the columns, brand, model, minivan, and then on line 2 through whatever we have the data. Toyota is the brand, Prius is the model. Is it a minivan? 0 means no. Is it a wagon? 0 means no, and so forth. In this case, typically 0 means no, 1 means yes. So note that line 1 contains 13 names, and then every following line contains 13 values. Also in this case, note that it's okay that the names contain blanks like Civic Hybrid, because the commas are separating the values. We're not looking at blanks to separate only the commas. So Civic blank hybrid is okay. All right, let's look at the hands-on example 3.5. Now, in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to use the SAS import wizard by selecting File, Import. So go to example 3.5 and follow it along. But briefly, what you're going to do is when you begin it, you're going to get this Import Wizard dialog box. And if you'll notice, it has a bunch of different ways you can enter the data. In this case, we're going to choose the option called comma separated values, or star.csv. And you choose that and click the next button and then continue on. And when you finish that, you could do a proc print data equal what you named it, miles per gallon for cars, and then you can see that it read it in correctly. All right. Again, I would encourage you to go through the entire example as it's shown in the text to get all the details. The next one is importing data using SAS code. So when we use the wizard, the last question that it asked was, do you want to save the code? What this means is if you say yes, it's going to actually create a code, SAS code, that you can use again and again to read in the same data set, or you can modify it to read in a different data set. In this case, we can look at one that would have been similar to what's created by opening the file called import example.sas. So let's look at how this works. It's the proc called proc import, and it imports datasets. So we have to define several things here. First of all, the out dataset is what we're going to save. In this case, we're going to save a file called work.miles per gallon for cars. Notice that's going to be a temporary file because it's work. The data file equal is the name of the file we're reading in. So we have an output file called out, an input file called data file. It's pointing to a comma separated value file called cars MPG. The DBMS, which is the database management system, is going to tell it what kind of data set this is. It's CSV, comma separated values. We're going to see some other ones here in just a minute. And also the word replace says if that output file already exists, then replace it with this one. That's an optional thing, but typically you would want to use that. Get names equal yes means that the names are on the first row. Typically, again, we want to do that because it makes it much easier for us. And then data row equal 2 says that the data begins on the second line. So if we run that, then it's going to read in the data and give us the output we saw a little earlier. All right, so let's look at this then example 3.6 as we saw it. Again, I would encourage you to run this on your own. All right, then a second one is called import example 2.sas. This one's a little different and because we're going to read some data from Excel. So notice the several things here. The output file now is going to be called work.fromExcel. And then the data we're entering is example.xls. Now this is the old Excel extension. You can also use XLSX for a newer one. The database management system is XLS, and we're saying to replace it. Now something different on this example is we have to use the sheet option. And in this case, the sheet means what is the name of the worksheet in Excel. If you look at if you go into Excel and look at your file, at the bottom of the file will be the name of the sheet. Sometimes they typically give names like sheet 1, sheet 2, sheet 3, but you can rename them. In this case, the sheet is named database. And again, we have this get names equal yes, meaning that the first row contains the names of the various columns. All right, so let's look at what kinds of things we can read in. Now, sometimes this is updated. You might go out and just see if maybe they've added some stuff to it, but typically these are the ones we would use. Notice you have Excel and Excel 2000 and later, other versions of Excel, comma separated values, tab delimited files, Lotus 123, which is an old, and DBF, which is again an old data set. But you still find things out there named that, as well as Access datasets from Microsoft. Now, we imported data, but what about exporting data? We can export data using SAS code also. In this case, it's proc export. And just briefly walking through this, we see that the data set is the data set we're reading in. Out file is the data set we're going to output, or we might call it out table. And DBMS, again, is the DBMS identifier. Typically, we use the label or replace option, and we'll describe those a little later. All right, so let's do example 3.7. Open the file called export.sas, and you'll see this is what it looks like. What we're going to do is we're going to read in our old friend some data from my SAS Live, and we're going to create an output file called exported.csv. So what are we doing here? We're reading in a SAS data file that already exists, and we're outputting it to a CSV file, which we could then read in Excel or something. We indicate the DBMS, and we don't have to say that the names are on the first line or anything like that. It's going to take care of that itself. And then again, replace, if it's already there, it's going to replace it. All right, so again, all of those examples I encourage you to go through. If you need to stop the tutorial, run through them real quick. We just don't have time to do all of them as we're moving along here. So what if we already have a data set out there and we want to know, what's in that data set? A lot of times, if you're working in a corporate environment or university environment, people may send you data sets that are SAS data sets, or oftentimes, particularly in governmental kinds of things, they create SAS 7B DAT files, and that's what's downloadable. And so you're going to end up with these SAS 7B DAT files, and you say, what is in this file? Well, you can do a couple things. First of all, you can copy that file into a folder that you already have defined as a library. For instance, we have my SAS Live, so I could copy, if I copy a SAS 7B DAT into the folder on Windows called SAS 7 or SAS Data, then it will automatically appear whenever I go into SAS and open up that library. It's going to show that that file now is in that library, and I can do things with it. We can use proc datasets, for instance, to list the information about the variables in the data set. And this is what it looks like. We say proc datasets, contents, data equal, and we simply give the name of the data file and run. So let's do an example, 3.8. Let's open up the file called contents.sas, and we can see it's the same one we just saw previously in the slide. If we run this program, we're going to see that the output includes the names of the variables, the types of the variables, the length of the variables, and the labels associated with each variable. So it gives us a brief or a quick table look at what was in that data set. Here's an example of that data set list. And as we can see, variable 3, it alphabetizes them. So the third variable in the data set is age, numeric type, length of age, and it has a label, age on January 1st, 2000, and so forth. All right, well, that's going to conclude this part 1 of chapter 3, and then we're going to pick up on section 3.9, going deeper, understanding how the data step reads and stores data in the next tutorial. And again, we appreciate you watching these tutorials. I hope you're getting something out of them. Please like the tutorial and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.